Hello everyone, welcome to this internally screening review of Next of Kin. We're continuing again with Hooptober with this Australian horror film from 1982, directed by Tony Williams, starring Jacki, Kerin and John Jarratt. This is a bit of a cult film, similar to Phantasm, which we reviewed a few days ago, and has since received some cult acclaim from the likes of Quentin Tarantino, of all people.
Just got put out on Criterion.
It did indeed, yes. Criterion just did a horror collection, and this got seemingly quite a sort of pride placement. It basically focuses on a young woman whose mother passes away and leaves to her an estate in which there is an old people's home. She starts reading the diary of her mother and finds that there are strange echoes of things happening to her in the present that were happening to her mother in the past. Her mother seemed to be very paranoid that there was some kind of evil goings on in and around this building. Maybe there was some kind of curse or there was some kind of supernatural element to it. Steadily as the film goes on, it becomes more and more sort of psychological, and there's a big sense of paranoia throughout that builds through the character, so it makes for quite like a sort of tense experience as you watch this character unravel. So I'm going to pass it to you, Rupert. What did you make of Next of Kin?
It's a film that at the time didn't strike me particularly hard. But as I've had time to ruminate on it, I've sort of come to appreciate it more the more I've thought about it. Because as a film, the way it's structured is it's a woman's slow descent into paranoia that sort of culminates. So there is quite a lot of downtime, surprisingly for an 80s film. You know, 80s horror films famous for being very extravagant and extra. And this, for a long period of it, is not particularly extravagant or extra, and kind of pulls its punches a little bit and lets you ease into the plot. When I was first watching it, I was kind of thinking, you know, well, the plot here really isn't that intriguing because we all know what's eventually going to happen.
Right.
But the more I've thought about it, there are certain sort of nuances to it that I've really come to appreciate. And I think, firstly, visually this film is really, really good. Generally really well shot in a way that's not particularly flashy, but especially in the sort of last 20 minutes of the film, there are some amazing shots, some really cool like overhead camera movements, and the way it sort of shoots the house and these kind of violent action type scenes. It's really, really well done and kind of exciting in a way that a lot of 80s films maybe aren't. You know, there's a lot of really visually amazing 80s horror films, but there's more direct than people remember.
Yes.
And a lot of it is quite visually uninspired. It really kind of coasts off of 80s aesthetic and people's nostalgia for it. Whereas this is kind of going for something different. And also, I mean, this is an Australian horror film, and I've never seen an 80s Australian horror film from this era. I know like a few of the new ones like Wolf Creek and stuff. Right. But I haven't, you know, this is the first 80s Australian horror film I've seen, and it was just funny watching an 80s horror film with those accents. Yeah,
it felt very European. It felt there was a kind of giallo quality
Italian.
to it. Yeah, it kind of reminded me, in terms of previous horror films we watched for Hooptobers, of The Beyond.
A little bit,
which is itself Italian.
It's about a house.
Yeah, exactly. The kind of psychological, supernatural-esque elements to it, I think, drew parallels in the cinematography as well. I know what you're saying about the cinematography. I agree. Kind of going off what you were saying in terms of 80s films not necessarily being that flashy with their cinematography but still having striking visuals. I think where perhaps in other films there'd be some striking design work, maybe characters that looked really inventive and stylish, this focuses more on the in-camera stuff and making the mundane feel like extraordinary.
Which is harder to do.
I agree. It shows a greater sense of technical prowess and focus to kind of transform this real lived-in space into something more sinister. Exactly that. What did you make of the performances in this?
I thought pretty much all of them were good. There's certainly some sort of hamminess to it. Some of the like older actors are a little bit sort of cheesy, and the boyfriend character's a bit cheesy, but the main woman in it, her character isn't particularly strong, but I thought her performance was really, really solid.
Yes.
There's not like any bad performances, and there's some sort of villainous turns towards the end of some of the characters, which were very entertaining.
Those were maybe a bit goofy,
but like I felt like it worked in the trajectory of the film, because the film sort of becomes, as it goes on, more of the film you're expecting. It just kind of eases into it. If that makes sense.
I get you. I agree. Jacki, Kerin does an absolutely fantastic job in this, and in selling that very gradual downturn, because I think that's a thing that requires a deft touch, and there's a very easy thing to kind of lose all like credibility or genuineness. I actually quite liked the boyfriend character. What I liked about the way
Feels
he
a
was,
bit more grounded than
yes,
the others. Yeah.
what I liked about the characterization of him was the fact that he wasn't super dismissive. I think an easy trope for 80s horror, or horror in general, to be honest, is the characters around someone going through these traumatic events just
Like,
being
don't worry about it.
yeah, you know, like negging or gaslighting people into thinking that they just that their problems are not problems, and thus driving them further down the horror spiral. This, you know, he's helping out. He's doing his
like
part,
that,
and yet the horror still remains, and the threat is, if anything, heightened because of his presence. Because in him being there, the threat has to step up to match him. Yeah. So I like that as well.
I think that's fair. Yeah. I guess I don't think the film has any serious flaws that I can think of particularly. For me, mostly what's holding me back on a first watch, because this is the kind of film I will come back to at some point and maybe not reassess it, but maybe appreciate certain elements of it when I know the direction it's going, because I won't find the slower intro to it as sort of glacial as it feels in the film on a first watch, because I do think when this film kicks into, you know, fifth gear at the end, it really does go, like, that whole section of the film is, I think, amazing. It's got some great like violence. It kind of, you know, ends in a bang, and it's got some sort of really satisfying, more schlocky, maybe 80s moments, you know, that you'd expect from a horror film like this, but done in a very sort of specific way. And I think Tony Williams, the way he directs the later stages of the film, he really shows this kind of stylistic approach, because I think in the early stages of the film it can feel a little more basic, but if I go back to it, I might pick up more of his sort of nuances and his style.
That's fair.
And maybe go and watch some of his other films, because I know he's done quite a few.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of its pacing, I think that is my biggest issue with the film, and something that genuinely does hold me back from appreciating it to its fullest. Because while I do completely agree, there is a lot of great, like, sort of technical and stylistic work at play, some solid performances throughout, I am just kind of, I hate to say it, I am just quite bored by a lot of what the film gives you, and there is a kind of villainous turn, like a kind of reveal late on, and I think the film does a pretty, that's unfair, I was going to say it does a pretty poor job in setting that character up, or setting,
I think she's pretty well set up.
But it's set up well with some of the exposition and things like that in the diary entries. But in terms of the character's subtle inclusion at various other points in the film, the kind of red herring-esque nature of that character being there in the way they are, I kind of found it like a little too underdone, like a little too blink and you'll miss it. Not that you need like this kind of villain clash constantly, it's not that kind of a film.
Yeah.
I did just find it a little underwhelming when the reveal is done, and, you know,
it's just quite obvious what's going on. I think that's the big problem. I think you don't have to have watched that many horror films to pick up on who's probably the bad one in this one. That's fine as long as maybe there's like that a little bit extra. Right. Like there's something else, and all there really is, I guess this is like slight spoiler territory, but the only real extra reveal is her accomplice, and it's not really much of a reveal because he's already weird earlier in the film.
Yes.
So you're kind of like, oh right, so he is weird, which does feel a bit sort of underwhelming. But I can't hate on it too much, just because that last section of the film is so great with the whole, you know, eye socket.
Yeah, it really. Oh, that's fantastic.
And like the guy in the wheelchair, and you know, you have these amazing like sort of swooping slow-mo shots around the staircase.
Yeah, the bit where it's like following up, chasing down the corridor.
Down the corridor. That's like overhead shot, looks amazing.
Great. Yeah.
Like really kind of inventive stuff. And then of course, like in the sort of gas station, I guess, with the is it the lorry or the truck?
The truck.
Yeah, he like drives through, and there's this. It's just a great little set piece, and it all comes together in the end in quite a satisfying way. And I think maybe it's just because if a film ends well, I always kind of think like, oh, you know.
Yeah, no, I can.
Whereas if the first half had been really great and then it ends poorly, I'm always like...
Yeah, no, I completely concede that point. Yeah, I just do think that the pacing is pretty off in the first half. And there's not much more I can say on it other than that. Purely personal preference, I just find that does hinder my enjoyment, because I am just kind of waiting for things to really kick off.
Yeah, sure.
But it is very satisfying once it does. So what do you reckon you'll give it at the end of that?
I think I'll give it a 6 out of 10. I'm interested to watch it again, because it's the kind of film I could see jumping up in my estimation. Okay. But I enjoyed it. I guess this is probably more of a deep cut for 80s film lovers, but it's cool to see an 80s horror film from Australia. I don't know what else to say.
Yeah, I mean, I personally would give this 5.5 out of 10. Again, I would be interested in seeing this again because I think even in this discussion, the stuff we've been saying about it has kind of made me reevaluate things a little bit. Certainly a film I would recommend to anyone like interested in horror that hasn't seen it and is looking to kind of get something kind of a specific vibe. I think that's something I always value in horror films, or films in general, but particularly in horror.
Yeah, this is a film with an identity.
Exactly. When you've got something that really, you get a product you can't get anywhere else.
Right.
And I think this is pretty unique. There are echoes of other things in it. I've seen people compare this to like The Shining in certain ways.
In terms of setting and stuff.
Yeah, and kind of the psychological angle of it.
I did like that it didn't go down the supernatural route.
Yeah, I appreciated that as well. I always think that writers trying to sort of creatively get themselves out of a corner and away from supernatural can end up with something more interesting because they've had to really like engineer a situation.
Yeah, sometimes, yeah.
Whereas supernatural is kind of a get out of jail free card. You just go, it was all ghosts, and then you don't really have to evaluate or pick out any details. It's just, it was all spooky shit. And yeah, like I said earlier, I get kind of flashes of Giallo to it. But if anything, I think that helps colour it because you don't necessarily see that many kind of Western works that do feature that. I know Australia isn't in the West, but it is essentially. So yeah, I think in spite of both of us being kind of lukewarm on this film, it would be a recommend from both of us.
I'd still recommend it.
Yeah, 100%.
It's interesting.
Definitely one we're looking to return to for the future. So yeah, that concludes our review of Next of Kin. We hope you enjoyed watching it. If you've seen this film or if you're planning on seeing this film, let us know about it in the comments. If you like this review, please click like and subscribe if you're interested in more horror content, reactions, all that good stuff. If you dislike this video, give it a dislike. And we'll catch you in the next video, hopefully tomorrow. Peace.
Peace.